During this video, we at Deloitte want to spend some time providing you with initial information and give you a framework for what standards-based teaching and learning is. This video is designed to help explain the reasons for this switch, explaining what standards-based is, and answering some of the most commonly asked questions, all of which were collected from Deloitte students. For those of you who like a roadmap of where this is going, here's an overview. Firstly, we'll be trying to convince you that the old system of traditional grades is broken. Then we'll try to talk briefly about how a standards-based approach is research-supported and best practice in the present and where a lot of schools are moving if they haven't already. Then I'd like to walk you through the benefits of the standards-based approach, and finally I'll answer commonly asked questions. By the end, you will still likely have some questions. This is not something we can fully understand or wrap our heads around with one video, but I do hope that this will be a good first step on that road for you. So what's wrong with the old system? On individual assignments, the numbers and letters only have the inherent meaning that teachers, students, and parents have instilled in them. We've separated out the way that we measure learning, the numbers and the letters, from the learning itself. And those are often vague averages that are not indicators of actual learning or success. When we average together different types of things, like reading and writing, we lose the specificity. The grades often don't let you know what you learned or need to work on, or what to do in order to improve. Let's look at an example. Imagine 3 students in the same class that has a lot of quizzes. These are the scores over the course of the unit. Student 1 followed this trajectory. The average is a 69%, a D+. The second student was very erratic, but also got a 69% because of the averages. The third student only averaged to a 60%, but note how their scores improved over the course of the unit. They started out really not getting it, then slowly grew in their understanding, and by the end they demonstrated their proficiency with the content of the unit. None of these 3 average percentages actually show how well the student understands what they've learned. What if I told you that this class was called packing parachutes? Student 1 got consistently worse. Student 2 is erratic and you never know what you'll get. Student 3 struggled but seems to clearly know how to pack a parachute by the end. So now, if I'm the teacher of the class and I'm going to go parachuting, which of these 3 students do I want packing my parachute? Obviously, student 3. Student 3 has demonstrated to the best of their ability that they are able to pack a parachute by the end of the class, and yet their average is the lowest. Hopefully this illustrates how the numbers are not a great indicator of the learning that has taken place. The average grade has been divorced from the actual learning. In the old system, you may get points or have points removed for non-learning tasks. The assessments may be unfair in that they are unpredictable or unclear, and they become so high stakes that you, the students, often fear making mistakes to such a degree that it leads to stress, anxiety, and less risk-taking, because you know that it might affect your average. I'd like to give you a severe example of what a non-learning task might look like. Mrs. Sivaratnam has given me permission to share this anecdote from when she was in high school. In her chemistry class, the teacher was also the tennis coach, and so they spent class time talking about tennis, and he would include tennis questions for extra credit on the tests. Students who were invested in tennis and had time to watch it would score higher on the tests than students like Mrs. Sivaratnam who had other important things taking up their time. The teacher's testing practices favored a particular kind of student, and their course grades reflected something that had nothing to do with chemistry proficiency. For some students, an A might actually mean that they are good at chemistry, while for another student, they may only be mediocre at chemistry, but really good at tennis. That's an extreme example to make the point, but you see how things can creep into the grade that don't actually show how well a student understands the material. Standards-based teaching and learning is both the present and the future. It's been around for many years, has been successfully implemented, and a lot of schools are making this shift. In our region, Singapore American and Morrison Academy have already switched, and ICS Hong Kong is on the same journey we are. What this whole shift does is focus the learning experience in the classroom more closely on you, the student, as the learner, rather than on the teacher. I like this definition. SBG is a system for assessing students based on proficiency in clearly defined learning standards, allowing teachers to report more specifically on learning. This is both more specific and allows for more specific reporting. Here are some of the benefits. You should know exactly what you need to learn and demonstrate in order to succeed. Assessments should not be a guessing game, should not be up to the teacher's mood that day. That doesn't mean that you get the answers ahead of time and can just memorize and regurgitate. That's not learning, but memorization. For some skills, you need to demonstrate them in the moment. The goal of each lesson, unit, and class is your growth as a learner. One of the core features of this system is the feedback. Every time you say or do something in class, you are giving your teacher informal feedback on how well you're doing on your learning journey. Each assessment you turn in or assignment that you complete gives the teacher feedback. Then the teacher should give you feedback on the learning that you have demonstrated and how to improve or fix specific mistakes. Research has shown that students often ignore the feedback when they are given a traditional grade as well. Traditional grading involves a cycle of teaching, assessing, and then moving on regardless of student success, often leaving students behind. According to Fergus and Smith, this kind of system only allows those students who can learn at the expected pace to be successful, which leads to persistent inequities in the classroom. How many of you have ever felt like the class moved on and you got left behind? This system gives you opportunities to retry. When you make a mistake, it should not haunt you for the rest of the semester. How many of you have gotten one low score early in the semester and then had to try and pull it back up the entire time? You'll note that that one low score means that for the entire semester, your class average grade doesn't actually reflect your learning. If you demonstrate learning later, then your early failures and mistakes shouldn't be held against you, since you've now demonstrated the learning. This is also associated with less stress, as the stakes for assessment are lower. No longer does a mistake haunt you till the end of the semester, but it's an opportunity to get feedback and try again. Talat has already been doing some standards-based classes. We've got a number of pilot classes this year, and I've been teaching my AP Literature class as standards-based for the past 4 years. We've got a proficiency scale that will be used to evaluate your learning on each of the specific things you need to demonstrate in a particular class, the standards. Different classes will have different numbers of standards, and the way that they're assessed, whether once in a unit or throughout the year, depends on that. Each standard will be evaluated on this scale in different ways. Proficient, as you can see, is the goal. The goal is proficient. It means you've met the grade level expectations. Developing and beginning are below that, and still not quite there, and are the regions that will likely receive the most feedback and opportunity for reassessment. Extending, outside of the scale, is basically a way to demonstrate that some students have taken the expectations of the class and done something that extends beyond the requirements, but the goal remains proficiency. Here's a quote from a current Talat senior in my African literature class last semester. Honestly, I wanted to be an opponent of standards-based grading, but it's helped me to improve a lot in this class regarding my learning. I am less stressed about my grade, and it lets me focus more on the skills that I'm supposed to learn. That's our goal. And now to some commonly asked questions. When will this happen? As mentioned earlier, a few classes are already ongoing. Teachers have been receiving training in the system for over a year and a half. During the next school year, each teacher will be teaching one standards-based class. The following year, Talat will switch all classes to standards-based. What will I see in PowerSchool? Assignments in PowerSchool will no longer be scored in points and percentages. Instead, each assignment will have a specific standard attached to it. Larger assessments might have multiple standards. In PowerSchool, you will see the assignment, and then for each relevant standard, a mark of proficient, developing, or beginning. You will also be able to see how you are doing overall on each of the standards throughout the semester. What about my GPA? You will still have a GPA. However, it will really only be accurate at the end of a class. GPA was never designed to be a snapshot measure of how a student is doing along the way. Your GPA will be calculated by individual standards at the end of a class. Every standard at the proficient level will be valued at a 4.0. Remember, the goal is proficient. Developing and beginning standards will have a lower value. This will be divided by the number of standards assessed in that class. The transcript will represent the student achievement level of each strand in the class. In these mock-ups, you can see what this might look like. At this point, the transcript specifics and the details in PowerSchool are still being finalized. The transcript will report on the strands. For example, a student named Bob McCringle has all proficient in the English strands, but has one developing in his Bible class. On the right, you can see some of the standards and the strands that they appear under. This includes the standard by the end of the semester, the strand, and the overall course GPA. Please note that the math is easy, but the process to come up with and explain this is complex. We will be working to explain this in more detail at some other point. How will this affect my college applications? Universities know what this is and have ways to convert what they get from a variety of transcripts from around the world. We send our DeLatte school profile and it will explain everything they need to know. This has not been an issue for other students that come from standards-based schools. More importantly, it may actually benefit you in your learning abilities once you get to university. Dr. Katrina Kaler is a friend of mine and a professor of physics who has been using standards-based assessment in her classes. She references Bloom's taxonomy, which is a way that educators determine the difficulty of a task. Tasks lower down, such as list or define, are easier than ones higher up, such as analyze or synthesize. When I asked her about the benefits she sees for student learning, she said this to me. The lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy are easy to assess and easy to assign points. As we move higher up in this taxonomy, it becomes increasingly difficult to assign points. Yet this is the level at which university-level learning must happen. As a result, we must create mechanisms that provide a feedback loop to show students what they missed in their synthesis, or creative solutions, or evaluation, and have them do it again. Because this loop is an integral part of learning, we must move away from the traditional point-based system. I have seen much more creative submissions in classes where students are not afraid to take risks because they know they can rework the assignment. I can hold higher standards and expect a better analysis, organization, and execution when I know students can revise. There is no penalty in suboptimal first submissions. While resistant at first, students come to appreciate that this system doesn't penalize making the mistakes that are an important and inevitable part of the learning process, but is growth-centric. Isn't the 100-point scale more specific than a 4-point scale? It may feel more specific, but it actually means less. The difference between a 96% and a 97% is one of internal feeling, not a reflection of learning. The entire bottom 59% is somehow failing. When almost 2/3 of a scale is failing, then the scale is very skewed. The difference between failing with 20% versus 40% isn't that great. But that same 20-point difference at the top of the scale, from 80% to 100, is seen as much more significant. Note how a 0 may be not turning an assignment in, while a 50% is getting half of everything right. That is so much better than a 0%, but is reported with the same letter grade. The proficiency scale is more specific about the actual learning targets, and when taken with feedback, is more meaningful for growth and actual learning. I've included here a small assignment I used with my 10th grade students this year. Note how it's got the standard at the bottom, and then tell students what they need to do to reach proficiency. This particular student has one element in developing. I've highlighted this, provided a teacher comment on what they did well and how they can improve. The student then has an opportunity to demonstrate their learning again. Note how much more specific that is to the actual skill we're learning. It may feel unsettling because students are so used to traditional grades, but once they get used to it, this can become just as comfortable. I hope that this has provided some basic information about standards-based system that the lot is switching to, and answered a few of the common questions. Here you can see the sources used throughout the presentation. Thank you.